Hey everyone, welcome to another episode on how to get the best out of Claude Code. Today we'll be diving into one of Claude's most recent and biggest upgrades, skills. I'll show you how you can use different examples of skills creating animated artwork, posters, and even our very own GIF creator that you can use in your Slack channels. And not only that, I will be showing you how you can utilize this for your own real-world projects such that it actually matches your style and understands your code base to remove 99% of the errors. A lot of people still ask, wait a minute, what about sub-agents and what about MCP? Are they the same thing or are they not? And while others have tried many different ways to explain it based on technical details, I think it's much easier to think of it in the following way. Let's use a kitchen for example. You can think of Claude Code as the master chef. And skills are actually the recipe cards. They know the flavor, the standards, and all the ingredients, but they are only needed when you're using them. So this makes it context efficient. It only loads things in when it needs to use it. And that's the reason why skills are different from something like sub-agents. Sub-agents are like specialist chefs. They are able to handle multi-course meals because they are experts at doing different specialized tasks. When you ask for a specialist chef to come and prepare it, they're going to come with all of the details in their head. And while they're very good, it's only useful when you're asking several of them to be going off and do their own things while you coordinate amongst all of them. And finally, MCP is sort of like the kitchen doors and the delivery truck drivers. They are the ways in which you access the outside world as a chef. So if you need things like specialist ingredients or knowledge of a new particular area to grab your ingredients, you rely on the kitchen door and these delivery drivers in order to get hold of all these things from the outside world. So these external things are like your GitHub data, your Slack messages, your database, everything is external. So the best way to think about it is that skills teach the how, sub-agents handle the actual doing, and MCP is kind of utilized to access things outside in the world. And so the key thing here to understand is how all of these things come together to enable you to have a world-class kitchen that's able to create fantastic and delicious food. Now, before we start cooking, whenever I'm exploring a new feature like skills, I use something called Vectal.ai to consolidate my thoughts and planning as I'm researching these topics. I simply start a chat with Vectal and then I ask and tell it these are the topics that I would like to investigate. So in this case, you can see I'm starting plugins. And the good thing is that it's powered by an inbuilt perplexity process, so you really get that as an immense benefit. But not only that, it gives you access to all of the state-of-the-art models that you can think of. And Vectal always keeps this list up to date. But Vectal isn't just for research. It's actually really good as a productivity tool as well. Vectal now has workflows, which allows you to automate repetitive actions across the various different things that I work with. So for example, I have this workflow that actually scans incoming emails from potential collaborators. It automatically allows me to assess how relevant they are and then prepares a draft reply so that I can then be prepared to go back to them about where we can actually find some good synergies and whether or not to go forward. So if you really want to supercharge your productivity and leverage all of these different functionalities, head on over to the link in the description and you can get an entire month free of Vector Pro if you use this code below. I'd like to thank Vector for sponsoring today's video, and without further ado, let's get started with Claude Code skills so you no longer have an excuse and say that something is a skill issue. All right, so here you can see I've just got this empty repository, and the only thing I have at this stage is this .claude folder. When I run Claude, the only thing that we have right here is the status line that we see below. And if you want to get hold of this status line, you can check out the instructions in the description below. I have an entire tutorial focused on how you can actually create your own status line that looks something like this. Anyway, with this blank project, what you want to do here is basically head on over to this skills repository by Anthropic themselves. There are multiple ways for you to install this. One of it is to use the Anthropic marketplace approach. And the second one is to actually just clone and copy the files manually. And the other one is to actually use the plugin system, which is what Anthropic recently released. So the way we're going to do is by just cloning this entire repository and then copying the files manually. This is the most kind of like straightforward way such that you don't really need to think about using plugins. So what you want to do is just open a new terminal. And then over here, I'm just going to clone the repository into this project over here. So you will see that now that I've cloned it, there's a skills folder. And what you want to do is just delete the .claude plugin folder. And you actually don't really need the rest of these things as well. But the best way to do it is just drag and drop it into your .claude and then do move. And you should be in a position where you actually have all the skills. And the way you can test this is by typing Claude. And then you can ask it, what skills do you have? All right, I'm on version 2.0.22. So you want to make sure that you're on the latest version of Claude Code that definitely has skills. I think it came out in version 17 or 18, but getting the latest one is always safer. All right, so you can see here, it has access to the following skills: Algorithmic Art, Canvas Design, Slack-GIF Creator, and then the other ones as well: Artifacts Builder, MCP Builder, which we'll see over here. Okay, so once you've got set up with the project, let's actually take this time now to go through some of the skills to demonstrate what it actually does within Claude Code. So I'm just going to start Claude over here. And like I said, just to confirm that you actually have it installed correctly, you can always ask, what skills do you have? And it's actually going to be able to retrieve your skills. So you can see here, it knows about all of the specialized skills. So we're good to go. And so let's actually play around with some of these examples so that you get a better idea of what exactly Claude Code skills are and how they differ from other things like sub-agents or commands and why they are so cool. All right, so the first thing we're going to do is look at this one here called a Slack-GIF Creator. And if you actually just open up the skill.md file, you can see it says that it's a toolkit for creating animated GIFs optimized for Slack. And then it ensures that it matches the size constraints. And then all you have to do is say something like, make me a GIF for Slack of X doing Y. All right, so let's just give this a shot right here. So just in your terminal, I'm going to say, make me a GIF for Slack of a robot dancing with text saying, plot skills are amazing. Okay, and let's just kick this off and see what happens. And you will see that right here, the first thing that occurs is that it's going to say use skills Slack-GIF Creator. So it's identified based on your text, even though you did not say anything about skills, it actually knows that this is a skill that relates to the task that you've given it. And that's the thing about Claude Code skills, is that it actually is going to be able to be automatically invoked whenever it feels that the context provides it. Okay, so let's just kick this off right now and see what happens. And if you actually look into what the Slack-GIF Creator actually has, the main thing that it has is that it's going to, first of all, outline the main requirements of what the Slack-GIF needs to be like. So there's some size constraints, there's some dimension constraints. And then if you look at how the toolkit is actually structured, it has a set of core functionalities as well as templates. All right, so in order to understand what this skill is actually doing, you can see that it's going to create a dancing robot GIF with vibrant text. And in order to do so, it's actually going to create a dancing robot Python file. All right. And so I'm going to just say yes to this for now. And then let's see what actually happens here. It's making use of something .core.gif builder, core.frame composer, and core typography, and so on and so forth. And you can see, where is it getting this from? It's actually getting it from this core library within the Slack-GIF Creator itself. Is making use of the defined functionality within this skill itself. But the other thing to notice is that it's using these things called templates. And you don't see these templates popping up at the top. Why? Because these templates are actually used differently. These templates here are going to be used for things like animation, transition, and things related to how to make things move within the generated GIF itself. All right. And so I'm just going to close this, and you can see here it's generated the dancing robot.python. So with this generated dancing robot.python file, what it's done is that now it's used the templates to understand how to do things like a twinkling effect, how to do a pulsing scale animation. So if you actually just jump to pulse here, it actually shows you that this is an example of how you might go about doing a pulsing animation, and it's applied it not as a library, but almost like a code example into how to achieve it within this generated Python file. So hopefully this shows you a difference between how it's using the core functionality over here as well as the templates. But let's not wait any further. Let's actually go ahead and let it run this dancing robot Python file and see what it generates. And as you can see here, it's actually generated a GIF that you can actually use for Slack, and it's already been optimized, and it actually has the text that I asked it to have, and it actually has a dancing robot. Now you will notice that this dancing robot isn't exactly looking like a robot, and I've seen this several times, and there's one small change that you need to do. So what I suggest that you do here is just take a screenshot of this. So I'm just going to use the Max screenshot tool, and then I'm going to paste it into the terminal, all right, with Control V, and I'm going to say the robot is appearing as a white rectangle. This is wrong, fix it. And because there might be several reasons about why it's not showing up. To be an encoding issue, most likely it's because it's using an emoji that it doesn't actually have access to. So what you want to do is say, think hard about the fix and keep it simple. All right. And so you will see that this will then kick things off such that it's going to be able to think about what is causing the main issue of the robot not appearing. And you will see that this is actually a common issue when you're using this Slack GIF creator. It actually sometimes generates and uses things that doesn't actually represent what you actually asked it to do. But overall, you can see that this skill has actually enabled Claude Code to create animated GIFs based on your definition. And you wouldn't have been able to do it without actually knowing about all the skills here about what makes a Slack GIF great, what the constraints are, and what are the best ways to go about creating something that's animated, that's optimized for Slack. All right, so now I'm going to allow edits to Dancing Robot because it needs to actually, you will see here, it actually needs to create the robot image out of different parts. And this is the reason why you want to use something like Thinking Hard. You can see because it doesn't render properly within Pillow, which is a Python image library. All right, and so it's going to create it by itself. And now you can see it's just going to continue to update the rest of the file in order to actually construct that robot image within the Slack GIF. The skill is teaching Claude how to create a Python file that then is able to generate a dancing robot. So let's take a look at this here. And this is the final result. You can see now it does look a lot more like a robot, and it is dancing, and it has the text that I asked it to do. So you can see this is the first example of how a Claude skill actually works, and it's actually enabled Claude Code to now become an expert on being able to create Slack GIFs. All right, so that's the first example. Let's try something else. All right, so now let's try another one of these examples. So let's try this algorithmic art skill. And just take a look at it here. It says it creates an algorithmic art, and then it allows you to do some level of parameter exploration. And when it gets generated, you see what this means. So let's just go ahead and enter it. Generate algorithmic art of a beautiful, dizzy city skyline. Okay, and let's just see how this goes. You actually go through a bit of philosophy thinking in order to think about what would make the best algorithmic art before actually doing it. So you can see here it's identified the use skill algorithmic art. So I'm just going to say yes and not ask again. It will talk about how it will actually use this philosophy as a guide towards creating the final art piece itself. All right, so as we wait here, let's look at the templates that you have over here. So you can see there's a generated template about how to create p5.js generative art. And then after that, there's this viewer.html template, which gives you a web page that allows you to play with the parameters. Okay, so let's just see how it's done it here. All right, so you can see it's written a file called the Urban Rhythms Philosophy, right? And it's written it out here. So you can see cities are not collections of buildings. They are living systems of vertical aspirations. And then it actually covers all of the different things that goes into creating this final algorithmic art. Okay, so then after it's done this, you will see that it will use the template viewer HTML file, which gives an interactive web page that allows you to play around with the different parameters of the art because it is, after all, algorithmic. And then finally, it will then create its own version that allows us to play around with the generated art. Okay, and here you go. You can see the Urban Rhythms HTML file has actually been created. So I'm just going to reveal this in Finder, and then I'm just going to open this up. And here you go. This is the generated art, and you can actually do things like adjust the building density. You can change the height variance of the city. You can adjust the flow of the buildings, and then you can also do the illumination of the windows. So this is very bright, very low. And it has this like thing called downtown focus. So you can see whether or not it goes and focuses on the things below. And then you can change the randomized seed so that you'll be able to see different versions of it. And so a bit of bonus that I think you can go about doing is that I want this to be animated. So let's see if it can actually go about giving this a little bit more animation and a little bit more life so that it's not just going to be a static HTML. All right, so it's going to do some modifications now in order to make this animated. And I'm hoping that this will actually work well, and we'll see what it actually looks like at the end. Okay, and so it's done now, and let's take a look at the final result. And as you can see now, this is actually animated, and you can actually increase the animation speed. So the animation is not just appearing to the clouds, it's actually appearing to the shimmering. So let's actually increase the illumination and the height flow states. And then maybe we can adjust this a little bit, and the building density. This one is not really working correctly, but it's fine. And let's just pull this up. So there you go. It was able to adapt the templates to allow you to be able to also modify the animation speed as well. All right, so this is another example of a Claude skill, and let's try one more. Okay, so the next one we're going to try is this one called Canvas Design. And here it is telling you that it's going to be quite similar to the previous one, but rather than it being algorithmic where you can change the values, we're going to be able to just create original visual designs. So let's say generate a beautiful canvas art piece of a pirate shore calming, aesthetic, and themed. Okay, and let's see if this is going to be able to pick up. I think this should be clear enough. Yep, so it knows that it's supposed to use the canvas design skill. I'll be interested to see how this turns out. It's going to probably follow a very similar process as it did earlier. In this case, it's created this pirate shore philosophy. So you can see here it's the intersection of maritime romanticism and contemplative stillness, right? And let's actually look at what it has over here. So in this canvas design, it has a bunch of fonts that has already been included as part of it. And if we dive into this skill a little bit more, you can see after it's created the visual philosophy, then what it will do is that it will create kind of like a subtle reference. They say this is one of the most important aspects of creating this art piece. So we'll be able to see how this turns out. I think it's going to have some textual elements as well because of all the fonts as well as what it says within here. So it's actually, once again, this time created a pirate shore.py. All right, so you can actually see it's using matplotlib, and then it's created the different gradients. I'm just going to allow it to run this now. And because it doesn't have matplotlib, it's going to go ahead and install it using pip, and that's totally fine. With this skill here, we will see how it turns out. I wonder whether it's actually use any of the PDF files, and this you can see because of the fact that within the canvas design skill, there's actually these different fonts. You can see it's actually utilized this crimson text regular font, which I assume that it's, kind of reflective of what it feels will actually be able to encapsulate the design philosophy of this pirate shoreline. And then it's going to be like this word that says still waters, etc., etc. So I'm actually pretty excited to see what actually happens. You can see that there's going to be some coordinate text, so it really does give this sense that it's creating something that's very sea or maritime influence. All right, and then and then it's gonna, I see that what it's done is that it's actually just adjusted the font path based on where it actually really is. So that's useful. And let's actually take a look at the draft here. Okay, yeah, so it actually has created a shoreline. And this is actually really interesting. I think this is actually midway through, but let's actually take a look at it. You can see, there's like the beach that's over here. It's got, all these different poles, I think. And then there's like a little ship in the background. And it's this nice kind of like sun ray effect as well. I don't know whether that's actually totally intended, but we will find out. And let's actually let this continue. And it says that this is the draft, and it's now going to create a refined museum quality version. So yeah, I'll be interested to know how this actually turns out. And I'm just going to zoom this to the side, and I thought it would be interesting to actually see what it's actually trying to do here. All right, so I'm just going to scroll up a little bit so you can see that the idea here seems to be it's going to create an ocean, the shore, some wave patterns, duck pylons, and I think this is probably what the duck pylons are. And then wood to create a ship in the atmosphere in the background, and then it's using matplotlib to create the sails, I think. And then after that, there's a bunch of markers, some anchor lines in the sand, and then the typography that says still waters. It's actually quite artistic, and if you actually look at how this overall looks, it's quite cool. Okay, so let's actually take the design philosophy here. So it's kind of like stratification of sky meeting water, natural geometry of the coastal landscapes, and the typography behaves like driftwood, carved ship names. All right, so you can see here it's actually created something called Pirate Shore Final.py. So this one is where it's actually going to create the final museum quality. So let's take a look. And yeah, I mean, like it's actually using a create PDF version. So this is the final version, the museum ready version. So it's actually not too different from what we see on the right hand side. You can actually scroll in and you can actually see these wave patterns in the background. Yeah, and it does have an extra sail this time for the boat. And I think there's a little bit more detail on these piles. Yeah, and you can see that it actually has put some barnacles or something around the bottom. And then let's take a look at the sand. It actually has a much, okay, yeah, so it has a much more complicated looking compass. So, but overall, you can see it is a slightly more complicated version of it, and it actually now has created a PDF version over here as well, right? And it's actually this final version over here. Okay, cool. So at least you can see how this one works. Out of curiosity, I'm actually going to try to ask it to do something slightly different. So I'm going to say, maybe you can create a logo for me based on my website, because, it's been one of those things where I haven't actually had a time to think about, some of the rebranding that I'm doing. So let's actually just see what happens. So I'm just going to clear the context here, and I'm going to say, create a canvas art that reflects a poster for my website. And then I'm just going to pass in my website here and see what it can actually do to actually give me something that is in relation to my website. So it's going to fetch the website, and I'm really hoping that this works is because what I am using is actually a single page application. So sometimes it's not able to actually load the contents of the website. And so it seems that it's going to go about and all right. So it seems to have used the web search about it in order to actually identify, what the content is about. And actually, if I was using an MCP server like Exasearch or maybe even Brave Search, it would have been able to pull the contents. But let's see what this actually ends up with, because, I'm actually trying this for the first time myself. So let's actually look at the philosophy here. It's a design movement born from a convergence of computational thinking and spatial clarity. Okay, and he's called it neural monumentalism. That's actually a pretty cool name. But I'll be actually interested to see what it actually comes up with at the end of this entire process. Right, so you can see here that it's actually created the poster, the create Python file, and it's just going to run it now. So let's actually take a look at this poster. And maybe I have to actually reveal it in Finder, and let's take a look. Oh, okay, this is actually pretty cool. Let me just put it back into there. All right, so here you go. All right, so it's actually created this poster, AI game development resources, builder packs, and professional tools. It's actually pretty cool, taken, I think a little bit of the colors that's used on my website, and then it's like combined a little bit of the content. It's got this neural kind of like connections, which I think is overall actually quite interesting as well. And let's actually just jump back here to see what it's done. Yeah, so it's going to try to read the PDF, which is really interesting. But overall, yeah, that's actually an interesting, take on a poster for a website. And I'm just going to pop this here again one more time so you can see it. And you can see this. I would say it's not too bad. I mean, for a poster, it does encapsulate both the colors as well as the content of my websites. But just showing you a different example of using the same skill, but for a different output this time. All right, so we've talked quite a lot about how to utilize skills and several different examples of how skills might actually work. But I think one of the most important things here is to actually understand how would you go about creating your own new skills. And one of the best ways to do this is actually creating a new skill that is relevant for the project that you're working on. So a couple of weeks back, I actually created this Clodometer, which is a Reddit sentiment analysis that looks through the different subreddits on Reddit and uses the OpenAI ChatGPT API to perform sentiment analysis on the different subreddits. It ultimately allows you to see not just the volume of messages, but also the overall sentiment that people have, whether it was negative or positive. So I'm just going to open up the project here within Visual Studio Code. You can see that there's an app over here. You can see that the folder is fairly simple. There's an app over here, and there's a couple of documentations, which is just the PRD. Now, if you're interested in getting all of this project, it's part of my builder pack, which you can get. And if you're interested in actually seeing how I built this entire project from this single PRD over here using a multi-agents architecture, you might want to check out one of my earlier videos where I did all of this live. And then if you just want to jump forward and get hold of the entire project, as well as all of the different sub-agents that are used for the coordination, all of the different commands, it's also part of my builder pack, which you can get hold of in the link in the description below. So just imagine that you're starting off here. So what you want to do here is that because this app here is actually quite complicated. It's connected to Supabase in the backend. It actually makes use of shared CN components. It's using the OpenAI API. So it actually needs to know how to. It's using ChatGPT by the OpenAI platform. And you can see that the way that this was implemented was that we actually had several different sub-agent experts. So a ChatGPT expert, a Reddit API expert. Now, while you can go ahead and utilize sub-agents for incremental changes, you need to understand that most of the time when you're building upon an existing application, you probably are not going to go ahead and just let sub-agents run in parallel unless you have a very clear outcome that you have in mind. Instead, if you're going to make incremental changes, which is what I'm going to show you here, this is where skills would come in very handy. So let's just take a look at how you want to set up your project once you have this running over here. So I'm going to start Claude here, and I'm going to start Claude right over here. And what I'm going to start off with is saying something like, study the existing code base and understand the application in app. Because that's actually where most of the concentration of what the app is like is going to be over there. Okay, and while this is running, I'm going to actually do another thing. So I'm going to switch very quickly back into the skills repository that we were looking at over here. You can see here's the outcome of one of the runs earlier of creating a poster using one of the skills, using the Canvas design skills. And what I'm going to do is I'm actually just going to copy this entire skills folder. And within this app, I'm actually just going to throw it within here as well. So the idea here is that I want to actually inherit all of the skill. I actually want to, now And the key thing here is that I don't need all of these other skills. So I'm just going to highlight them, and then I'm just going to delete all of the other skills that we have over here. All right. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually delete all of the other skills that we have over here, except for this skill creator skill. And this skill creator skill is exactly what it sounds like. It's actually for you to be able to create skills that are directly, it's actually a skill that teaches Claude how to create new skills that would be utilized for your project. And yes, and one of the things that you could do is you could use this template skill that you have over here, but it's not really that useful. As you can see, it literally just gives you the name and then a description, right? And you could very easily do this. So the template skill is not that useful. What I'm going to do here is actually make use of this skill creator. And if you look into it, you can see that it's actually a guide for creating effective skills. Should be used when you want to create a new skill or update an existing skill that extends Claude's capabilities. Okay, and you can see that there's a bunch of scripts here that will actually do all the templating for you and how to make sure that it's packaged correctly and then how it validates it as well. So I'm going to show you how you're going to use this in your new project. Okay, so now you have this over here. It's actually given this overall architecture. All right, and I'm going to say here, and what I'm going to do, because I just popped this, I'm just going to kill the terminal for a while, and then I'm going to resume. And this will then allow me to resume from this existing session that I have over here so I don't lose the context. So what I'm going to do now is create skills for this project that will guide best practices for working with the front-end components, backend endpoints, and the database schema. Use the skill creator skill. This is really important because what I discovered is that in some cases, it doesn't recognize that she used the skill. So this detection mechanism is sometimes probably not always very robust. So it's actually really important that you utilize this. Otherwise, it may end up not using the skills, because you can see here the skill creator skill actually has a bunch of scripts that it should be using. Okay, so let's just see what's happening here. And now you can actually see it's actually using the scripts that are provided as part of creator. So you can see here it's using init skill. And you want to see to make sure that you've got assets, references, and scripts that showcases the examples, the API references, and everything else, because this shows that it's actually used the init skills properly. And now it's going to then edit the relevant skill MD files for each of these skills that it's supposed to be creating. And so with that, it should actually create skills that are more in line with how Anthropic suggests for you to do that. All right, and if you actually just take a look at skill creator here, is that it actually has a quick validate method, and then it has something called package skill. And I think in this case, it just creates a way for you to distribute it via a zip. And this quick validate is just to make sure that the skill.md is actually formatted as a YAML, and just making sure that it has all the front matter. So we're just going to let this run to completion, and then we'll see what we end up with at the end. Okay, and now we're back. You can see that it's actually created all of the different skills. And this time you can see that for the database schema, backend API, and front-end components, it's actually created the related scripts. It's gone in to really think about how to ensure that within this code base, if you're making any changes to any of these components, that is provided the relevant best practices and scripts to guide Claude Code into creating more features on top of your existing code base. So as you can see here, after you ran all of that, it actually packaged this up. So I'm not going to bother too much about that. But if we look very quickly, it's actually created some patterns of how to use the backend API based on your code base and how you like to do things within your code base. We can see the same thing for the database schema. So there's actually a current schema of how things are. So this is actually a reflection of how the existing Superbase field is set up. So I can just show it to you right here. You can see this is the existing Superbase database in the background. And you can see that the way that the schema has been laid out is actually correct. And you can see also the same thing here for the front-end components. There's a component template so that it matches the different styles. And then there's the component patterns of the different of the CSS settings as well. So this has set up your project with skills related to your specific need. And now you can distribute it or put it into your repository so that when you want to add new component, it will adhere to the best practices that you see here. All right, so let's just put it to the test now. So you can actually look at the app that I had. We have this Claude Sentinel monitor. And one of the main things here is that actually the top keywords here currently is placeholder. So now is a good time to actually utilize the skills to make some new changes to this code. I'm going to jump out of Claude just to make sure that it actually gets all the skills. And I'm just going to resume this session so that it has the context. And I'm going to say, what skills do you have? And it's always useful to do this just to make sure that it's actually picked up the various different skills that you actually just created. All right, so you can see it's a skill creator, and then the database schema, backend API, front-end components. All right, so let's actually just see what it'll take here. So I'm going to switch to plan mode. which is actually very useful whenever you are building and thinking about building some components. All right, so I'm going to say, let's get the top keywords working as they currently placeholders. So this should actually just look into how the current functionality is looking. All right. And so now that that's plan mode has done it, you can see here it says that it's going to ask me some clarifying questions. Now, this is one of the new things that you've seen in Claude Code, is that now you actually are able to look at the different questions that it's asking and give real-time answers to it to guide its plan. And this is a really nice UI that you have over here. You can see I can actually scroll and cycle through different things. How would you like keyword extraction to work? Extract keywords when the API is called. No database storage. Simple but slow. Recalculates each time. Pre-computed and cached. So I think I do want it to be pre-computed. All right, so let's see. I wonder which one we should use. Maybe we can do this pre-computed one. What extraction algorithm should we use? And let's actually use OpenAI extraction over here, right? And then should keyword sentiment be calculated? I think we can just show frequency count at the moment because I think our sentiment analysis already kind of like takes that into account. So I'm just going to do that. So great, you can see this here. All right. And then, with this approach, algorithm, sentiment, and submit, it actually allows you to submit the answer. So this actually helps to guide the plan. So in the past, it would just give you a list of questions for you to answer. And it's not really useful because sometimes there's just so many questions that you have to answer that is just a little bit too much. So I really like this interface that we have over here. All right, so I think it has the plan now to implement the keyword feature. So before we begin, I want to say continue with the plan, but remember to use skills as required. So you can see here, the database schema skill is running, and you know that it's actually going to be utilizing the skills as it performs any changes to the schema. And you've already defined the best practices for the skills for working with your project across the backend, the front end, and the database. This actually will make sure that the changes that Claude Code presents and annex within your project is going to be more targeted, it's going to be more relevant, and ideally reduces the number of errors as well. So what we're going to do is just let this run till completion, and then we'll draw back at the end to see what the end result is, because it's got quite a few steps to do. It's got to create a keyword service. It's going to create the endpoint to populate these keywords, and then it's going to add all of the remaining endpoints in order for it to then be persisted within the database. So hopefully this has actually demonstrated to you how to create new skills that are relevant to your project and why it's very beneficial. So I'll see you in a bit. All right, guys, we are back, and let's just take a look. So the entire feature implementation has completed. All I needed to do after that was to do a migration on the database. All right, and you can just take a look at it. So before this was actually just a placeholder and a feature wasn't implemented. But now with the 3 new skills, we were able to get this working, and it effectively got this right in one shot. The only thing that I needed to do was to actually perform the database migration and then do the backfill of all the information that you see here. So you can see I can jump into all of these. So in Claude AI, the top keywords are Claude, API, MCP, and performance. If I go to Claude Code, it's also similar, but then you can see a large emphasis on tokens and sub-agents. And then in Anthropic, it's around the Claude, the API, and performance and integration as well. And you can see Haiku is really coming up right now. So this is all working. And if we jump back into the code, you can see that thanks to the skills that we were able to implement, it was able to effectively make all the changes. And the only thing, like I said, I needed to do was to actually run the migration and then run the curl command to populate the data. All right, and so this is now working now. So as you can see, when you provide the right amount of skills that is tailored to your code base, you've actually now enabled Claude Code to be able to make very targeted and precise changes that adhere to your best practices. This includes the full stack experience, the front end, the back end, as well as the database. These skills can now be shared with the rest of your team and enable Claude Code to be a much better performer. All right, so that brings us to the end of today's video. Hopefully you've gotten a good grasp of what the new features of skills are and why it's so valuable. If you enjoyed it, don't forget to give this video a like, hit that subscribe button, and don't forget to turn on notifications so that you'll always be the first to know whenever new content like this drops. And if you really enjoyed this example and want to see how I actually created the original Claudometer using Claude Code sub-agents, you want to check out this video over here. It shows you the multi-agent architecture that I use for all of my projects. All right, till next time, I'll see ya.